Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story comes from Tom, a man from the UK who went to the Philippines for some bachelor fun and ended up falling for a sweet and humble bar girl. Now, we all know how these stories usually end, but Tom's journey is filled with unexpected twists. Did his relationship end in ashes, or did he make it out alive? Stick around to find out. I never thought I'd be one of those people with a crazy story to tell. My life was quiet, ordinary, and maybe even a little dull. I grew up in Manchester, worked odd jobs here and there, and never really had much luck with women. Honestly, I had resigned myself to the fact that some people just aren't meant to find love, or money for that matter. But that all changed when my father's older brother, a man I barely knew, suddenly passed away. My uncle had always been distant. He was in his 50s, never married and rarely visited the family. But he had a soft spot for his younger brother's only son, which was me. No one saw his death coming. Uncle had been healthy, active and in the prime of his life, but a sudden brain hemorrhage took him without warning. In his will he left £500,000 to me, a gesture of love that stunned everyone. I was in shock. I didn't know how to process the fact that my life had changed overnight. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to escape the mundane routine I'd been stuck in for years. Looking back, I will always be grateful for my uncle's kindness. The inheritance didn't just change my financial situation, it set the stage for a journey that would change my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. You will also find out very soon. With that kind of money, I could do anything. Travel the world, start a business, and even turn my life around completely. And honestly, that's exactly what I wanted. I was tired of feeling invisible and unfulfilled. This inheritance felt like my golden ticket. Not long after, I reconnected with an old university mate, Alan. He'd been living in Cebu, Philippines for years and loved it. Alan had made a name for himself among the expat community there and had fully embraced the local lifestyle. Alan painted a picture so enticing of the Philippines that I couldn't resist. So I booked a flight. The moment I landed in Cebu, it felt like a different world. The streets were bustling with life, jeepneys packed with passengers, vendors shouting out their wares, and music blasting from every direction. Alan met me at the airport and was thrilled to see me after so many years, but offered a word of caution that the Philippines is a beautiful place, but don't let it fool you, especially when it comes to the women. Alan explained how many foreigners fell for the charm of local women, only to be manipulated into losing their money. He warned me not to show off my wallet, get too drunk, or share vulnerable sob stories. One sentence of his will always remain imprinted in my mind, and that was, "And whatever you do, don't get attached to bar girls or women who seem too good to be true. They're professionals at getting what they want." Huh? I just took those words for granted. I nodded, but honestly I wasn't worried. I thought I was smart enough to avoid falling for any tricks. Alan was a regular in the local scene, and it showed. Everywhere he went, people seemed to know him. Bartenders, restaurant owners, even the staff at massage parlors. That first week was a whirlwind of adventure. Alan knew all the best spots in the city, and he made sure I experienced them all. We started our days with luxurious massages at high-end spas where the staff treated us like royalty. Lunches were at restaurants serving delicious Filipino dishes I'd never even heard of. Ishion, sinigang, and halo-halo for dessert. In the afternoons, Alan took me to the off-the-beaten-path beaches, places so stunning they looked like they belonged in a travel magazine. Everywhere we went, Alan was treated like a celebrity. Locals waved and smiled at him. Bar owners sent over free drinks, and women flocked to our table as if we were the main event. It was all about building relationships, and it was pretty clear he'd built plenty. At first I was overwhelmed. The attention, the energy, the sheer vibrancy of Cebu, it was a lot to take in. But by the second or third night I was hooked. At the bars the women were gorgeous, and for the first time in my life I didn't have any trouble getting laid. Alan introduced me to a few regulars, and they were more than eager to make sure I had a good time. For once, I felt alive, like I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. Alan loved to tease me about not getting used to this, as they love him here. So I was just getting the VIP treatment by association. I laughed along, but deep down, I couldn't deny that he was right. This wasn't my world, it was his. I was just along for the ride, and what a ride it was. And let me tell you, the drinks weren't cheap. A cocktail could cost anywhere from 200 to 300 pesos. That's around £3 to £5 at the fancier places. And when you start buying rounds for new friends or the women who joined your table, the bills pile up fast. By the end of that week, I'd spent over 70,000 pesos. That's £1,100 just on nightlife alone. But as fun as it was, something felt off. None of the women I had met seemed real. They were charming, sure, but there was always an angle. I started to feel like a walking ATM, and that's not what I was looking for. By the second week, the nights, as thrilling as they were, started to feel hollow. The women I met were charming, but the connections were shallow. Alan, on the other hand, was in his element, dancing, playing games, and buying lady drinks for his companions without a care in the world. One evening, while Alan was busy entertaining a group, I found myself sitting alone in a corner of the bar, nursing a drink. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt lonely. It didn't make much sense. I was surrounded by people, by excitement, but something was missing. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at the far end of the room, talking to an older man. I couldn't stop watching her. She smiled at him politely, but I could tell she wasn't really interested. It was the kind of smile you put on when you're just going through the motions. There was something about her, something different. When the man finally left, she glanced across the room and caught me staring. My heart skipped a beat. Instead of looking away, she smiled. A warm, genuine smile that made the rest of the bar seem to fade into the background. Before I could overthink it, she got up and walked over to me. She said hi cheerfully and asked if she could join me. Of course, I said yes. Her name was Alyssa. She had this infectious energy about her, bubbly, talkative, and impossible to ignore. Within minutes she had me laughing and completely at ease. As we talked, she opened up about her life. She told me she'd been working as a bargirl for the past year to support her family. Her father had died in a factory accident, leaving her mother to raise 3 kids on her own. When her mother fell ill, Alyssa had to step in and take responsibility for her younger siblings. She admitted that she hated being a bargirl, and most men treated her like an object, and only a few were kind. But she didn't have a choice right now. Her honesty floored me. Unlike the other women I'd met, Alyssa didn't ask about my money or try to impress me. She seemed genuinely interested in me, my life, my family, my dreams. When Alan took one of the bar girls outside, I decided to follow his lead. I paid Alyssa's bar fine and asked if she'd like to go for a walk. She agreed, and we ended up strolling along a quiet street, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her dream of opening a cafe someday, a cozy place where she could serve the best coffee in town and give her family the life they deserved. Her eyes lit up as she described it, but then she grew teary-eyed, as sometimes it felt impossible to her. She said no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. I didn't know what to say, so I reached out and held her hand. She just smiled sweetly and rested a hand over mine. That night as we walked back to the bar, I couldn't stop thinking about her. For the first time in years, I felt a connection that went beyond the surface. Alyssa wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. She wasn't just another bar girl. She was someone I could see a future with. Alyssa made me feel like I was finally living the life I'd always dreamed of. By the time my trip had ended, I was smitten. Alyssa was everything I thought I wanted. Kind, humble, and full of dreams. We promised to stay in touch, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to look forward to. Back in the UK, my life quickly fell back into its usual routine, but this time, it didn't feel so empty. Alyssa and I messaged constantly. Photos, voice notes, and long conversations that made me feel connected to her, even from thousands of miles away. She never asked for anything, which made me trust her even more. But as our relationship grew, Alyssa started opening up about her struggles. She told me about her mother's hospital bill, the school fees for her siblings, and the constant pressure she felt to make ends meet. Some days she was so overwhelmed that she couldn't answer my calls, which left me worried. At first I tried to comfort her with words, but it didn't feel like enough. I wanted to help her, to fix the things that were causing her pain. That's when I made my first mistake. I offered to send her money, not much, just enough to cover her immediate needs. Alyssa resisted at first, saying she didn't want to burden me. But eventually she accepted, promising to use the money wisely. I started with £500 a month. That's about 37,500 pesos. And for a while it felt good. I told myself I was helping the woman I loved, making her life a little easier. But what started as a small act of kindness quickly snowballed. Alyssa's gratitude after the first transfer was overwhelming. She called me in tears, thanking me and saying how much it meant to her and her family. It made me feel like I was making a real difference in someone's life, like I was her hero. But soon the requests began to pile up. It started small. £100 here for her mother's medication, £200 there for her siblings, school fees. Then there were the occasional emergencies, a leak in the roof, a neighbor who needed help, or a utility bill that had to be paid immediately. At first I didn't mind. I could afford it, and I told myself that was what love looked like, supporting the person you cared about no matter what. Over time, Alyssa began to lean on me more and more. She admitted she was working fewer shifts at the bar because she felt safer relying on me. Alyssa often spoke about her dreams during our conversations. She wanted to leave her life as a bargirl behind, to grind her way to something better, a peaceful, stable future where she didn't have to rely on strangers at bars to make ends meet. She admitted she couldn't wait to build that life with me. At the time, I dismissed it as emotional talk, something people say when they're overwhelmed or hopeful about the future. I cared about her deeply, but I wanted to take things slow. I felt like rushing into anything could ruin what we had, and I wanted to be sure of the path we were taking together. By the second year of our relationship, I was sending her £1,000 a month. That's about 75,000 pesos. On top of that, I'd spent over £15,000. That's around 1.1 million pesos, covering her family's needs, including buying her a second-hand car and paying for renovations to their small home. It wasn't just the money. Every time I visited the Philippines, Alyssa made sure I felt like a king. She cooked for me, took me to beautiful beaches, and constantly told me how much she loved me. I felt like I was finally living the life I'd always dreamed of. It was during my third trip to Cebu when everything took a drastic turn. Alyssa had been more emotional than usual, talking about how much she missed me and couldn't wait for me to spend time together. I figured she was just excited to see me again. But when we met, I noticed she seemed restless, almost nervous. One night as we sat together after dinner, Alyssa broke down crying. I was caught off guard and asked what was wrong. Through tears, she explained that her mother was pressuring her to marry a wealthy landlord from their village. She hated that guy and didn't want to ever marry him, even if he was the last man left on earth. She told me her mother believed this man could offer their family financial stability and a better life. Alyssa said she didn't like him and didn't want to marry him, but her mother was adamant. If Alyssa refused, her mother threatened to shame her and even throw her out of the house. I was stunned. How could she just throw her out of the house like that? Alyssa was the breadwinner for her family, the one keeping everything afloat. The idea that her mother could throw her out didn't make sense to me. When I asked about it, Alyssa shook her head and said I didn't understand her mother's strict traditional ways. She said her mother doesn't care about her, and in her eyes marrying this man is the only way to secure their family's future. She didn't see her. She only saw what she could bring to the family. Her words hit me hard, but at the same time I couldn't help but feel confused. Why hadn't she mentioned this earlier? Why was I hearing about it now, face to face, instead of over one of our many calls? Alyssa wiped her tears and said she didn't want to worry me from a distance. She wanted to explain everything in person, hoping I'd understand the gravity of the situation. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt like this was being sprung on me out of nowhere. But another part of me couldn't stand to see her so upset. The next day, Alyssa took me to her village to meet her family. It was far from the bustling city and rural area with narrow dirt roads and simple homes. Their house was modest, a bamboo structure with a tin roof. Her mother was bedridden. Her two younger siblings sat quietly in a corner, and the atmosphere felt heavy, almost suffocating. Alyssa's mother greeted me warmly, but wasted no time getting to the point. She thanked me for taking care of Alyssa and supporting their family, but then she brought up their situation. She explained that, as Philippine tradition demanded, a dowry was necessary for the marriage to be honored in the village. Then she named the staggering amount, 3 million pesos, roughly £52,500. I was speechless. The number felt enormous, and I couldn't hide my shock. My mind immediately went to Alan. I wanted to call him, to hear his perspective. But deep down, I already knew what he'd say. He'd call me an idiot and tell me to walk away. And that was the last thing I wanted to hear right now. Alyssa didn't say anything, but her expression said it all. She was desperate. I thought about everything. Her struggles, her dreams, and the connection we had built over the past 2 years. I convinced myself it was a cultural tradition. I wanted to do the right thing for Alyssa and show her family I was serious. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur. Alyssa was over the moon, practically glowing with happiness. She threw herself into the preparations, picking out her dress, planning the ceremony, and talking about the life we'd built together. Alan, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled about my decision. He told me I was moving too fast and that I didn't really know Alyssa or her family. But when I asked him to be my best man, he reluctantly agreed. The wedding was small but beautiful. Alyssa looked stunning in her white dress, and her family seemed genuinely grateful for everything I had done. For a brief moment, it felt like all the doubts and questions I had didn't matter. We were married. We were starting a new life together. After the wedding, I returned to the UK, while Alyssa stayed in Cebu to finalize some paperwork. A few months later, when Alyssa told me she was pregnant, I was over the moon. I thought of becoming a father, starting a family. It felt like everything was finally coming together. When the baby was born, I flew to Cebu immediately to meet our child. But the moment I saw the baby, a nagging doubt crept into my mind. The child's features were nothing like mine, not the slightest resemblance. I had fair skin, light brown hair, while the baby's skin tone was darker, and their hair jet black. The nose, the eyes, even the shape of the face, it didn't match mine or anyone in my family. I brushed off the feeling as overthinking, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter. Alyssa seemed unbothered. She smiled, saying that the baby was ours. Alyssa brushed off my concerns, saying the baby took after her side of the family and how excited she was for our new life together. I wanted to believe her. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, the doubt never left. I decided to stay in Cebu for a while. 3 months post-delivery, things seemed normal. Or as normal as they could be. Alyssa was still sweet, still attentive, but there was a shift in her priorities almost immediately after we got married. One day she reminded me that she wanted to open a cafe under her name. She was adamant about it. I tried to reason with her, saying we should focus on the baby and that starting a business could wait. But she wouldn't hear it. She said this cafe was her dream, her chance to finally leave behind the life of a bar girl and prove to the world and herself that she was someone different now. She wanted to move on from that chapter of her life, and she wasn't going to wait. I wanted her to be happy, so I agreed. I put up the money for the cafe. The launch itself cost me 1.5 million pesos, that's roughly £26,000, and I spent over 750,000 pesos, another £13,000 on marketing. It wasn't just a small cafe. It was designed to be trendy, upscale, and Instagram-worthy. It cost far more than I had anticipated, but I told myself it was worth it if it gave Alyssa the happiness and security she craved. The cafe started well. It attracted plenty of customers thanks to the aggressive marketing and the hefty money I poured into its launch. But as the business picked up, Alyssa became busier than ever. Without any discussion with me, she hired a nanny to take care of the baby so she could focus on her new role as a businesswoman. She started buying properties one after another. I had no idea why she needed so many investments. And when I questioned her, she had an answer ready. She told me it was all for our child and the future kids she planned to have with me. She said she wanted to make sure they had everything they needed and that they would grow up secure and comfortable. Her reasoning seemed noble enough. But there was one catch. As a foreigner, I wasn't allowed to own property in the Philippines. Her mother and Alyssa explained that all properties would have to be bought under her name. They assured me that it was just a technicality. that we were a team, and everything would always belong to us. I trusted her, so I agreed. Looking back, it was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made. She was spending lavishly on herself too. Spa treatments, high-end clothes, and weekly salon visits. The cafe became more of a status symbol for her than a dream. Her siblings, who used to study in a government school, were now enrolled in expensive private institutions. I was paying for their tuition, extracurriculars, and even coaching classes. If Alyssa wasn't at the cafe or out shopping, her mother was at home, running the household like a dictator. She interfered in every aspect of our lives, from how the house was managed to decisions about our child. What hurt the most was how little involved Alyssa had in our home. Her mother insisted she didn't need to cook, clean, or even take care of the baby. I tried to argue that Alyssa should be more hands-on, especially with the baby, but it always ended in a fight. One day I confronted her mother directly. I told her I felt disrespected in my own home, and that Alyssa's absence and her interference were creating problems in our marriage. Her response shocked me. She snapped back, accusing me of being ungrateful for everything Alyssa had done for me. Alyssa, of course, took her mother's side, saying I didn't understand their culture and how things worked, and that I was ungrateful of a man for disrespecting her mother despite her efforts to manage my house. Manage my house? When had I ever asked for that old hag's services? Of course, I didn't say all this to Alyssa's face, but that argument left me humiliated and hurt. After everything I had done for her family, the 3 million pesos dowry, the sibling school fees, the medical bills, I thought I deserved at least some respect. I never wanted them to thank me or sing my praises, but a little humility would have gone a long way. Instead, I felt like an outsider, a bank account that they had free access to. Over time, Alyssa's behavior changed even more. She hardly spent time at home, and when she did, she seemed to go out of her way to pick fights over trivial things. How I stacked the dishes, how I spoke to her mother, or even how I dressed. The distance between us kept growing. I started to feel like I didn't know Alyssa anymore. She wasn't the sweet, humble woman I had met in the quiet bar. And that's when I started to see it clearly. The blindfold was coming off. One day I overheard a conversation between Alyssa and her brother. They were speaking in Cebuano, but a few words stood out: property, money, and Tom. My stomach sank. That night, while Alyssa was asleep, I decided to check her phone. What I found confirmed my fears. Messages between Alyssa and her family detailed how they had planned to use me from the beginning. The properties I thought I owned were in her family's name, and the cafe I'd bought for her was being run by her brothers. Even the monthly allowance I'd been sending was being funneled into their accounts. But the biggest betrayal? Alyssa had been seeing someone else. The messages revealed that the child wasn't mine. It belonged to her longtime boyfriend. The two were high school sweethearts. That dude knew about her fraud and was himself a sham. The messages on Alyssa's phone confirmed that the child wasn't mine, but I needed proof, something undeniable. I couldn't just confront her with suspicions. So I made a plan. The next morning I pretended everything was fine. I smiled, played with the baby, and even offered to cook breakfast. When Alyssa left the room, I carefully took a strand of the baby's hair and tucked it away in a small bag. Within a week I had the DNA test results. The truth was hidden in black and white. I wasn't the father. Confronting Alyssa was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I showed her the test results and demanded an explanation. At first she denied everything, but when I brought up the messages I found on her phone, she broke down. Alyssa tried to justify her actions, saying her family had been in dire need and she didn't know what else to do. She claimed she had no choice but to deceive me, though she felt sorry for the pain she caused. Her tears didn't move me this time. The woman I had loved, trusted, and supported for years had been lying to me all along. I knew I couldn't get back the time, emotions, or trust I'd lost, but I was determined to recover as much money as possible. I threatened to take the DNA results to court, expose her affair, and file fraud charges against her family. Alyssa panicked. She begged me not to go through with it, saying it would ruin her and her family's reputation. I told her the only way I'd stay silent was if she agreed to a settlement. Thankfully, proving that the child wasn't mine spared me from paying child support or transferring any assets under the child's name. Legally, I didn't owe Alyssa anything either. It was a small win. Through a lawyer, I managed to recover £200,000 from the properties and assets I'd funded. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. For a brief moment, I thought I'd won, but Alyssa wasn't done yet. Unbeknownst to me, she had contacted local authorities and accused me of coercion. She claimed I had forced her into the settlement by threatening her with the DNA results. Suddenly, I was facing a legal battle in a country where the odds were stacked against me. Alan had warned me earlier that things could get ugly if I stayed in the Philippines. He explained how quickly situations like mine could spiral out of control, especially with Alyssa's family potentially turning the legal system against me. But before I left, I decided to make one last move. During one of my trips, Alyssa showed me a Bitcoin wallet on her phone. She had mentioned it in passing, saying she was investing in cryptocurrency for the future. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now it felt like my last chance to level the playing field. The night before I fled the Philippines, I accessed Alyssa's phone. To my surprise, the Bitcoin wallet still had her credentials saved. What I found was jaw-dropping. Nearly £800,000 worth of Bitcoin sat in that wallet. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the funds into my account, knowing it was my only way to recover what I'd lost. And then some. I left the Philippines the next morning, narrowly avoiding a legal summons. Alan helped me arrange a flight. The moment my plane landed in the United Kingdom, I didn't waste a single minute. I contacted a lawyer and sent Alyssa divorce papers immediately. The thought of having a name attached to mine was unbearable. The Philippines had given me some of the best moments of my life, but it had also taken so much from me. I knew I could never return. Alyssa and her family had ensured I'd be blacklisted, and the legal threats made it clear I wasn't welcome there anymore. Back in the UK, I started rebuilding my life with the Bitcoin funds. I was able to recover more than what I had initially lost, but the emotional scars ran deep. For months, I couldn't stop thinking about how I had been manipulated. I had wanted love so badly that I ignored every warning sign, every red flag. But in the end, I came out of it stronger and smarter. Looking back, I realized that not everyone in the Philippines is out to scam foreigners. I met some genuinely kind people during my time there, and I'll always appreciate the beauty of the culture and the country. But if there's one thing I'd advise young men, it's this. Go to the Philippines for fun, enjoy yourself, and spend your money casually. Don't just get attached. Don't fall for the promises, the affection, or the so-called dreams. And whatever you do, don't fall for a Bargirl. Have a trusted friend like Alan by your side. And as my dear friend had once advised a naive me, protect your heart, soul, and most importantly, your wallet. What do you think of Tom's story? Have you or someone you know been through something similar? Let us know in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.